The miter joint is one of the easiest corner joints to put together. Just a couple angled cuts and you've got a seamless classic picture frame. Today you and I are not reinventing the miter, we're working with it, fixing its weak spots, and showing how to make miter joints make sense. A miter is just a set of equal angles that come together to form a final corner. Two 45-degree cuts make a 90-degree corner, which is what you'll see in squares and rectangles, but change the shape and the angle changes too. A hexagon has 6 sides. Each corner needs to be 120 degrees. So each cut on each piece of stock needs to be cut at 60 degrees. It really doesn't matter how many sides you have, the math always works like this. The joint only comes together cleanly if both miters add up to the final angle. The beauty of the system of angles is that we're always hiding the end grain on each board. Each cut turns that rough open end into a part of a seamless corner. And to see why, just look at this cabinet door. Right in the corner, you can see I've got rough texture and a blotchy stain. It's darker here because the grain's sucked up finish like it's on a juice cleanse. You can play a few clever tricks here like glue sizing to slow down stain or finish absorption, but it's an extra step and it still might not look right. And that rough grain, that's not going anywhere. Now let's go back to the other cabinet door. That's a miter. The corner disappears. The grain turns the corner like it's meant to. But it's not just about looks, it's about movement. This frame expands and contracts as one solid unit. Because it is end grain to end grain and movement along the grain is nearly immeasurable, there's far less stress pulling at the corners. But this cabinet door, it's got an open mortise joint. The stock overlaps at 90 degrees so the grain direction are at odds. And that means a lot more internal stress as the wood tries to move. Come summer, those joints start creeping. One door moves more than the other and suddenly the gap between them isn't where you left it. That's what happens when the grain direction fights back. Beyond that, there's no simpler way to join corners. No complex joinery, no specialty tools, just single cut angles lining up clean. These joints are incredibly simple to put together and actually require less material. A joint can be created by a miter saw or a miter gauge on a table saw. Add glue and it's finished. A half lap joint, on the other hand, which is one of the simpler joints, needs both boards to be carved out precisely halfway through. And they need to match perfectly to fit. And even then, because the grains run in different directions, the joint will still fight seasonal movement. But for as simple as a miter joint seems, there's always 2 big problems that comes with them. Get them wrong, and they stick out like a missing tooth in a school photo. First, you're dealing with perfection. Your angles need to line up precisely. If you're just working with 2 pieces, it's easy to press them together and get a clean corner. But once you start multiplying that, 4 sides, 6 sides, 8 sides, those tiny errors add up fast. Suddenly, that perfect shape has gaps where the joints just don't meet. You can try to hide it, but once it's seen, it can't be unseen. Some will say to fill the gaps with a little sawdust and glue. And sure, it might look good until you apply a finish. That's when your mistake shows up again, but even louder. If you really want to do the sawdust trick, take sawdust from the same stock and rub it into the gap and use the finish itself as a binder. It blends better and it won't look as bad with stain or finish like a glue patch can. But even if you fix the look of the joint, you're still left with the second problem, which is strength. You're gluing end grain to end grain, which is like putting glue on 2 sponges and hoping they'll stick. The glue just gets sucked in before it has any chance to bond. So even if the joint looks tight, it might be barely hanging on. It's good for selling or giving away. Bad on your reputation later when it fails. But both of these issues, precision and strength, are easy to work with once you understand their shortcomings. And that's really where making starts. Once you understand why they fail, you can finally make them work. First, we'll work with precision. The internet is full of videos about miter sleds, setup techniques, perfect jigs, and square fences. And yes, all of that matters. But everyone starts in the wrong place. They start with a tool. I want to start with the wood. Most people grab a board and head straight to their saw. But if that board has even a slight twist or isn't perfectly square, your angles are doomed from the start. Doesn't matter if your saw is calibrated to NASA standards. Twisted stock creates compound errors that no jig can fix. So step 1 isn't about the saw at all. It's about the stock. Second, check your blade. You might have been using the same blade setup for months and it seems fine, but even if it's a hair out of square, you won't notice it on most cuts. With most table saw work, you can get away with being a fraction of a degree off, but not with geometry. Just like this hexagon example earlier, even a small error can have long-term consequences. You'll end up with angled slopes that leave a tiny gap at the top of your miters. Third, and this is the most important part, you need to lock your stock when cutting. It doesn't matter what setup you have, miter saw, table saw, even bandsaw, the stock cannot move. Here's the thing, blades are designed to rip and crosscut stock, but when you move into angle territory, the blade struggles. Stock can shift so slightly that you won't even notice it during the cut. But that tiny movement is enough to throw off your joint. Okay, sometimes it's not easy to clamp your stock to the fence. I've got a really thin board here. I want to clamp it to my miter gauge. Clamp is not going to work for it. So I have a trick. I have a stop block that I use on my fence, and you don't really have to use one that's built into your fence. You can just clamp a piece of stock to your fence. Now the first cut is easy. Now when I flip this over to do the second cut, I don't want to rely on my stop block because of that angle. So what I do is grab something that's a little bit thicker that I can clamp to my fence, and then I make that same exact angle with it. Now I can take my piece, place it against the fence. I have something to clamp, and I've got something to butt against. And this will be just enough that it won't slide as I cut it. If you do want to use it with a stop block, you can always cut the piece off and use it against your stop block. I've done a lot of talking, but I'm going to show you the workflow so that you and I can make this picture frame. We'll go step by step so that it all makes sense. First, I cut everything to rough size. I'm making a 12 by 24 inch frame, so I went 13 by 25 inches. This makes it much easier to square up. I'm marking the ends so I know which side comes from the face I liked. Then I joint one face side and then square up an edge. I brought it to my table saw to cut them all to final width. This is kind of a wide width for this picture frame, but it's really much better for demonstration purposes. I ran everything through the planer to mirror the side of the jointer. I shouldn't have any twists, but I'm checking just to make sure. I'm cutting to final length here to finish up dimensioning my lumber. If you plan on doing any inside routing, this is the time to do it. Step 2, make sure the blade is at 90 degrees. The best way to do this is to raise your blade as high as it can go and use a machinist square. Now I'll line up my outside corner with the blade tooth and the stop block behind my stock, making my cuts. I'm cutting a piece of stock at 45 degrees so that it can be used as a stop block. Just like before, I'll line up my tooth and then slide my new angled stop block to the end, using a clamp to hold it in place. And I really just have to finish the cuts at this point. I haven't glued this yet as we're going to talk about strength here in a little bit, but I wanted to show you that all my corners are closed up and it's looking really good at this point. Next up, strength. Because when people say miter joints are weak, they're not entirely wrong, but they're not entirely right either. Miters are already strong in one important way. They are one of the most stable joints when it comes to wood movement. Like I mentioned earlier, wood doesn't really move along the grain from end to end. It's across the grain where things shift. Each of these sides will still expand and contract with the seasons. You have to leave room for that kind of movement. This inside area needs to stay open so the wood can expand and contract freely. If you lock it down, your joints will crack. And I know this from experience. My first table 20 years ago, I tried to stop wood movement with epoxy. It took about 8 years, but as you can see here, it failed. I had completely locked in this miter joint, and it's going to fail. No matter what you do, you cannot break this woodworking law. Now wait, what about cabinet doors? The miter frame has a routed slot, and the panel is given an 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch of space so it can move freely. Picture frames don't have this problem since the art inside usually isn't glued to all 4 parts of the frame. Having said that, the weakest part of a miter joint is always going to be where the ends meet up. End grain is like a bundle of straws. It soaks up glue fast, leaving very little behind to actually bond the joint. To get a stronger bond, the first method is called glue sizing. It's simple, but it makes a big difference. The idea is to mix a little water into your wood glue, about equal parts water and glue, and paint it onto the end grains first. That helps seal the end grain so your final glue doesn't get sucked in. And the key here is to let this dry completely, or about 30 minutes, before you add your final coat of glue. Glue sizing helps, but it's not the only way to strengthen a miter joint. Another technique is to add wood back into the joint itself. This is called a spline. With splines, there are a couple different methods. The easiest one to start with is a corner spline. It's done after the glue up using a jig that lets you cut across each miter tip. Once all the corners are notched, you slide in a thin strip of wood. A lot of people use scrap from the project, but you can also use a contrasting species for a decorative look. Add some glue, insert the spline, and turn the sides flush once it's dry. It's simple, clean, and adds long grain strength. The second method is what I call segmented splines. It's an idea that I'm developing, but I think it creates a joint with enormous strength. You start by cutting grooves across the miter face, right along the angle that you cut earlier. But unlike a corner spline, this goes into the face of the joint. Before glue up, I cut a spline to fit the slot, and then I break this down into short segments, each one that's about the width of the entire joint put together. The grain on this stock runs vertically, not horizontally. If I were to just take this and stick it right in the joint, in time, the joint would break apart. So each of these pieces, they really need to be vertical. In just a second, I will glue this up, but when it's time to glue this up, I add just my 2 center pieces in. I slide it all together, add my clamps, and then I can slide a piece on the top and on the bottom. This gives the joint more racking strength, more glue surface, and it really makes it easy for me to clamp everything up because I don't have to worry about the 2 ends moving as I clamp. Cuts matter, reinforcement matters, but if you don't clamp it all well, then all that precision and strength really doesn't mean a thing. For this finished hexagon, I've got a couple techniques to clamp it. One that I like more than the other. If you're doing a complicated shape, an old tape trick is to take a piece of tape and clamp down one side, and then we stretch our tape out like this. I'll take my first piece and I'll place it right up against that end and lay it flat on my tape like this. Then I'll put my next one next to it. Then I'll lay my next pieces end to end from the last, and they really need to be right on the end. Now I can add glue to each corner, and the nice thing about this is I don't have to worry about glue getting on my table. It acts like its own little glue mat. Now I can come to this end, take off my clamp, and I want to cut this tape right to the end. Now it's just a matter of rolling this up like a giant hinge. And while this can work, it doesn't always work. You can get gaps that are difficult to line up, and really it's just because this is tape and it's not really clamping anything. So a better method is to go with something called a band clamp. This has got a ratchet on it so that you can really squeeze down and really clamp and give pressure to all parts of your project. And what I like to do is bring it right to the edge, add my strap, and then I'll cinch it up a little bit until I get my ratchet straight on a flat part of the project. And now I can start tightening this up. I can make sure that it's lined up everywhere, and that's looking pretty good. But that's all I need to do. And this method has never failed me. And finally, I'm going to show you how I clamped up this picture frame with my favorite clamping aid. You might have seen a jig like this where you slide one piece in and then slide another piece in, they meet up, and then you clamp it and you're done. But the problem that I've had with these is that you're not really putting a lot of clamping force between the 2 pieces. So I'm going to show you a clamping jig that works better than anything I've ever used before. Here's how this works. You unlock the sliding arms on each piece. You'll take 2 of the miter pieces, place them inside the jig, then you slide the arm up against both of them. Once it's in place, you lock it down. You're going to do the same thing on the other jig as well. And now I can add my glue. I'll add glue to only 2 of my splines for each joint and slide them in. Then I'll glue the mating miter pieces and slide those on. Now I can add the final top and bottom spline pieces to finish it up. Oh, and I do have some free plans for the clamping jig in the description. Thank you, my friend, for stopping by. I'm curious, what's your go-to way to reinforce a miter? If this helped, hit the like and maybe subscribe. A huge thanks to my patrons who help keep this work going. If you'd like to be a part of the team, or just throw a tip in the jar, there's a link down in the description. And remember to keep making things.